I can't control that. This is what I can control.
For about 20 years, he's not in the same room. And there's a
Can't be moving too much. Can't be moving too much. You have to go like this.
And so I think that I was shaking his head. It was like, what's up with the life?
Could it be, and I'm just theorizing again, because she was the dominant force in his life, and what he picked up in his formative years, and that he didn't want to, if he had that kind of relationship with a woman, he didn't want to have a woman dominate him. Could it be that thinking?
I don't
Because he had such a forceful, such a force in his life.
Well, maybe, but I don't know, because his father was very much there. I mean, his father founded the school. And the story of Fela's growing up years, what was so striking when I read it, is that he felt that he was thoroughly abused by his parents in the name of discipline, that there was so much violence, and he went on and on about it, and it was not the truth. It was his father.
Forgive me, I made an error with your biography. So she's a distinguished Nigerian British journalist and media entrepreneur. She serves on the board of trustees of the International Press Institute Nigeria, One World Media UK, and is a member of the steering committee of the.
I wish we had the psychologists to understand those genius of genius, very problematic, is that because in the sense that it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. His music was very much anti-establishment when he came to politics, the economy, everything else except gender. And what seems to happen is that he revived the idea of resisting colonialism and sort of subsequent iterations, which, have given us the sort of system of government that we have. But somehow, because the part of it dealing with gender favors and nature of I love his music, but I've never been really see, I can see my younger sister on that age, you understand? And so genius, I think we sort of want, and I think for that. One of those. And I'm genius, but at the same time also talking today to establish every human being that should be treated as human beings in this society. And so when people as influential as Fela carry some of their misogynistic ideas, particularly into popular music, I think it's damaging. As someone who works in media, I understand fully how that those things influence violence. And so it's important that everywhere we gather to celebrate music, that we also put out that cautionary.
Well, I won't say I was too young to meet Fela, but being a music collector and understanding the personality of different kind of musicians, I will be on the side of seeing them as looking at them from their positive side. And why I say that is because it's very difficult for people to understand the minds of most of these musicians. It takes people that are deeply into their music, people that can deeply access them through their works and their relationship with people to understand who these enigmas are. And what I'm trying to say in essence is that when you look at somebody like Fela, my conclusion about this enigma is that I think he had a dual personality. And at a point, he had to develop these personalities to fit in into the society that he found himself. That's my own take about that. Now, why do I say that? I remember Prof was talking about mattress. It's not only mattress, he had songs like Nakoi, he had some songs like Hello. And when people listen to this music, you might see Fela as somebody that has a lot of disrespect for women. But my question is that where do we now put hearts in music? How do we define a musician describing like a kind of musical heart? A lot of musicians also do some songs that doesn't have to do with their lifestyle. And when I'm talking about musicians, that's all I can do about the when you listen to some of the songs, in fact, you might even think it's itself. Like, why is this man singing and so abusive of women? Talk about their hair, talk about their bleaching body, talk about so many things. That you look at it that, is it that this one does not have a guy for women? Well, this is an art, this is a musical art. Their way of expressing themselves. That's my stand of Fela's music. Now let's talk about the women that are just taking advantage of them. But I think in his own position and in the African society we find ourselves, when we see ladies over around males, the man have the tendency of dominance. The man have the tendency of seeing women like, nothing. How would you explain a man that has 12 women flocking around him? How would you expect him to have that so much regard that society expects from a man to be given to such women that, in fact, a lot of men will see them as fights. When you see men, and that happens also today, when you see women flocking around musicians. So I think from the perspective of the media, from the perspective of critics, they see Fela as domineering. They didn't see him as someone that took a role of being protective and giving life to some people that would have probably lost their, lost interest in the life they would have found themselves. And again, he used these ladies beyond what a lot of people see for business. Some of them were dancers, some of them were vocalists. Then of course, and he also had this, that's why I said he had a lot of stuff, that's the conclusion. And how would you now see in regard Remy Taylor, who gave birth to, the children, how would you regard, how did she regard her? And how would she see Fela? How would you also look at Sandra, who turned his ideology around in terms of his music? He respected that also. So that's why I said that I think he has a way of fitting into the system at different times. And the same way, we also talk about his mother. How would he be so attached to the woman, just like was said earlier, where Prof said she still has, that is baffling to understand that somebody that was advocating for women's rights as this child that is not in the same line with her. Then he's an actor. He's an actor.
Okay, so it's okay, so culture is not static, and what we find is that what we actually call culture is essentially affirmative action for men. It is what we have used to justify the privileges and the advantages that men have had all their life. And then we call it culture so that we can justify it. And part of the reason why the arts matter is that they shape us and they also elevate us in top level, right? And so when you have a major musician of influence like Fela articulate these words, whether he's thinking this is the culture and therefore promoting it, what he's essentially doing is giving a license for certain attitudes when it comes to women, because that's the sort of power he had. He was that sort of musician. People listen to him. I've seen a guy break down and cry, listening to overtaking when we were talking about the economic condition. Because after that first time, I can't do a regular every chance I get, I don't believe it's like that. So when you have that sort of power, there's a level of responsibility that should come with it. And to sit down here and pretend that Fela was, what was the word used, acting? No. He believed every single thing he said. Let me go through something that I read in the books about what he said about women. He said, to call me sexist, for me, is still not a negative thing. If I'm a sexist, it's a gift. Not everybody can fuck two women every day. So if I can fuck two women every day and they don't like it, I'm sorry for them. I just like it. So to try and kind of talk about the man like that and somehow pretend that well, what you were saying is you're ignorant everywhere. And I think the part of the problem I also have with 27 women is that we talk about them as Fela's wives, but they were actually a creative force. They were part and parcel of his creation. They contributed to the art in terms of not just the dancing and the singing, because also watching the girls talked about that creative process where they contributed. And I'm not quite sure that they ever got the credit that was due to them. So from that perspective, he also looks like he was, excuse my language, a shitty employer, right? Because he did not look after the people who helped him create this amazing works of his. Does that take away from his genius? Does that take away from the fact that his lyrics, his arrangements, all of those things were amazing? It doesn't. And in many ways, perhaps, when you study a Fela, you get to understand the paradox of human beings and the sort of complications and so in societies that produce people like that. I think if beyond Fela, if you were to go and speak to people about the story of the Miles Davis, for example, some of these things also show up. And so discussing Fela in this way and being honest, like Prof said, about who he was when it comes to gender, I do not think takes away from his legacy, his beauty, legacy. But it can be a cautionary tale about how we need to use our arts to shape the way we think and the way everybody else thinks and foreshadow the sort of society we want to live in. Thank you.
the dancing to lady. What does that mean? That this is going on. And Fela's situation or his pronouncement, his behavior, it was not only in terms of his music. Fela bought pages in the newspaper to articulate his ideas. So it's not as if this thing came in the process of thinking. He was very clear. And then they had all these sessions in which he was preaching his gospel of degradation of women, was very much a part of it. And one of the things that is actually very interesting about Fela, because in certain ways, for some of us who study gender, Fela didn't come across as manly in the dominant sense of whatever it is that men are supposed to do. He wasn't providing. He was like a regular guy in Nigeria, in Yoruba society. The women were working. They were working for their food. He wasn't a protector. In fact, one of the things that bothers me, that troubles me so much, and I haven't been able to explain it, is the degree to which Fela himself did not protect himself from the government. I'm still wondering what his goal and his objective was in antagonizing the government so constantly, and they were beating him, throwing him in jail. And it's not as if he had a movement. Where were they going with this? And so if Fela threw his life into that in that way, he threw the lives of the young women into it too. When Kalakuta Republic was sacked in, I think it was 1978, some of the women, when you read interviews, they were sexually abused. The soldiers were putting broken bottles in their vagina. And it's not one person who said that. Yes, they were thoroughly brutalized. They were thoroughly brutalized. And then, after Fela's mother died, and he saw that Obasanjo was going to leave the government, the military government was going to give way to the civilian government of Shagari, he said to himself, you mean Obasanjo would have gotten away with all the brutalization and brutality he did to me and my people? So because of that, after his mother died, he decided to take her coffee. Was it to Jordan? He took the coffee. And the morning they were going to do that, the police were shooting at the van. With him and the women, everybody did, and said, oh, but nobody was hurt. And then when they got to do that barracks, what did he do? He used the women as a shield. He used them as a shield. Why would he do it? If he was such a patriarchal, dominant guy, isn't he supposed to be protected better? He used them as a shield. He didn't seem to have much compassion for them or what they represent.
I just want to say one more thing. Okay. The language of if we are pulled by a very magnetic force in an into a situation, it's our fault. Well, how we are treated is our fault. So I think these women who went to Kalakuta, to many who left home with that ran away from home, but definitely become objective because they want to be part of what the law was building. They didn't ask to be treated the way that they were going to be treated. They didn't ask for that. So I don't think the whole language about okay, you put yourself in a certain situation, it's your fault. We find it in a lot of TV language, it's your fault. we find it in the law, right? I don't think it's here. I don't think it's they asked to be, relation, they were to be high, to be dancing on stage pages, and things like that. I think that, like you said, separating the art from the person, I think that with that kind of thing came a responsibility, which I don't think that trying to protect the girls and to treat them as more humane. I don't think he did that. And I don't think it's their fault, the way that they were treated. I'm saying also,
Okay, so I wanted to say something because you mentioned that Fela was not a protector in the patriarchal sense of the word. However, it's very it's widely known that he married those, or that's what the media says, he married those women to protect them because a lot of them were homeless, they had come taken for shelter, they were being disrespected outside. So he made the point to make them his wives or his property so that they could be protected. And I know that word his property is obviously not feminist, but we've already established that Fela was far from a feminist. But would you like to touch on that he did that? Of course, we can look at the situation now and see that he was not the best boss or the best husband to them. But in the sense that he married those women to protect them from external factors, could you touch on that, please?
I'll give you my question. And I think those also with the idea that he was a very domineering person and he had a set of women. I thought that the act of marrying 27 women was more performative than actually trying to get a secret about protection. I don't think, and I'm theorizing, based on everything I've heard, and because he was a larger-than-life personality. So I don't think that he's almost, I think he's was an all-performative gesture. Look at what I have done. He made the headlines and make the front page. It was something that everyone clapped and said, I'm married to 7 people at the same time.
Well, I don't think it's the fact that you married 27 people. Whatever the marriage was, that the fact that you married 27 women is not the most critical thing. Because of course people will immediately start talking about polygamy and they will say things like most of the women were from polygamous families. Part of what I see in those kinds of pronouncements is a total ignorance about the culture, not only from Fela, but the rest of us too. The fact that we live in a polygamous society does not explain 27 women. That is something else. That is beyond polygamy. And so we have to understand that. And Fela did make the claim that the reason he married those women immediately after, I think it was about a year after the Kalakuta Republic incident, I think it was about a year or 2 after that, he said he married them to compensate them for their suffering during that terrible incident in which some of them, quite a number of them, were raped with objects. And one of them said the object was even lodging in her body for a while. So he said he was compensating them for that. But as we talk about what Fela calls his second marriage, we must talk about his first marriage. When you look at his relationship with Renee Taylor, his first wife, I think she also got the wrong end of the stick. So I don't think that we can justify his behavior by saying that these were girls picked up on the street. His behavior towards women, I don't think it was much better in terms of what she got out of it.
I actually think there's also a class issue, right? And the reason I say this is she refers to his relationship with other significant women. What's her name? Sandra, for example. A lot of the 27 women, as far as I understand it, came from pretty rough backgrounds, right? And so in many ways, poverty also means you don't get protection. Even in the patriarchal society, some men can protect you with their powers because of who you are born to, where you are raised, etc., etc. And if you look at his relationship, I think, with the other women, and despite them not being able to stay with him because of his behavior, you don't get any sense that they were treated in the sort of way, despite him having been promiscuous and having affairs and all of that. But in terms of just the day-to-day, the not being looked after, the level of even poverty, among some of these girls, not being looked after financially, all of that. I think part of it is he couldn't get away with it. Because on a sort of, he came from a family of privilege, right? And he ended up basically working with street girls, some as young as 14, 15, who had no protection. Many of them, poverty chased them out of their father's house to sort of come and live for a better life. So there's also a classist thing where, and even in Nigeria today, you see, where the children of the poor become fodder to be exploited by men of means, where poverty has been weaponized so that their sexuality is for sale, their body is for sale, they can be degraded, everything can happen to them simply because people believe if I have money and I sort of throw them a little bit of something, that works. And again, for me, the reason why this is important is because we're still in the midst of those sort of exploitative practices. And so if you talk and focus only on the music, the great things that you did, you then don't get a chance to have that sort of engagement that allows you to sort of point out why these issues are problematic.
I think I caused a lot. I do myself up of fella. I'll try not to support it. When I call him an actor, I live in life. I've been an actor in movies. My point really was trying to describe him as somebody that had different personalities that took care of every point of his life. That's what I was trying to explain. Now, when you said that it took some of those ladies that came off the streets, we all know that they were not exposed. We all know that in our crime today, once you fall a victim of being a subject to somebody that is more matured than you, we all know that it's natural for you to be taken advantage of in any way you look at it, sexually, emotionally, psychologically, and any way you can look at it. Well, a lot of people today they want to blame Fela for doing that and taking being submissive. But and we also ask ourselves if these women were also part of the problem. If a man, just a single man, had about 27 women walking around him, and we ask ourselves if they were part of the problem. Now, 27 women working around him, and he won't take advantage of them in different ways. Now we are hearing that, I mean, part of his own lifestyle, he will sleep with 2 women in a day, 3 women in a day. It's not something for me that should be something of pride, but it's something that came as pride because they were free. They were holding his hand there. How would they have seen those kind of ladies? And it was probably sexually active, of course, on high dose of marijuana and all that. So how would because the idea now is people seem to blame Fela for treating the ladies the way they were treated. But I think somehow we should try to also look at it that they asked for it. They asked for it. You left your parents' house at the age of 16, and so I females that did that. A lot of young men too in those days, maybe from children of nobody or even the high profile, they all went to the last shrine because they saw it as a place of freedom. I think I was talking.
I agree with these things when you said a few things. I may not remember all, but I wish so basically, they didn't ask for it. There was a power dynamic. This is a powerful man. And Kadir said, poverty is part of a patriarchal society. You leave where you are coming from, which is like you have nothing, and you go to someone for something, and he calls the shots. He's a very powerful man. A man, again, who comes from privilege, a man who comes from a powerful family, a man who has Western education, a man who's more knowledgeable, more exposed than these people. And they leave their homes, some of them very poor, very vulnerable, in very formative stages, and they come to this man because. So in that case, freedom, what might is in Kalakuta was just a construct of some sorts. It wasn't free. They paid with it with their bodies, they paid with it with the contribution to his music, they paid for it somehow. Let's talk about sexual pleasure, because we were talking about it. They said, he said, he thinks that women are sexual objects. He can have sex. The question, they begs the question, did he ever consider maybe the woman was having pleasure? Maybe not, because of the way that he viewed women. These girls who, even people make a case for murderers who kill people. They say because he's killed people, let's not electrify him, let's just throw him in jail for the rest of his life. They're anti-death penalty people. And meanwhile, he's killed a lot of people. I don't see it in that way, because there was a strong power dynamic. Fela was a very powerful man that they looked up to, and he did not protect them. They paid for it. It wasn't free. The freedom they speak about was not free.
Okay, I have a question. Mr. Next question to you. We're going to be rounding up, throw questions to the audience. But you talked about how these people had left their homes and come to Fela they had come to Fela because they wanted freedom. But we also know that Fela also had an interesting relationship with Remy Taylor. In her book, The Memoir, her daughter Yemi talks about how she went to London, she met Fela in London, they fell in love, and she wanted a quiet life, but life with Fela was anything but quiet. We talked about how he treated Remy Taylor and how she still stayed. So how would you compare that, seeing as Remy Leko was an exposed woman? We may not say she came from poverty, but he still treated her unfairly in many cases. So how would you come in?
I will use a song to play that. Ìwọ olólùfẹ́ mi, ìwọ ni mo fẹ́. want to believe that at the stage of his life when he fell in love with Reverend Samuel and all that time, I think his ideology was still intact. It has not changed from what it became in the later stage, Afrobeat and all this kind of thing. And every man has the right to fall in love, like we all know. But I think it was the society and the things around him that came to him on the pattern of gold that changed his ideology. That's my take. I wouldn't know if I'm clear on that, but I think if a man could marry, could have 4 children or something at the early stage of his life, that was a gentleman. So later I said there was a gentleman. Like it's not going to be a gentleman. And that was when he started to go and I'm not a gentleman. I'm the African man of Nigeria. And I think that's when he started his African, thing. So I think basically Fela was, he started well, but I think over time, due to society and due to the things around him, I think that's when he changed his general worldview. And also, like I said, let's assume that Fela was just like everyday musician, that they don't have the influx of women around him. How would we have perceived Fela today if it was only somebody like Reverend Samuel and Sandra that he had? Can we think deeper of how we would have perceived him? Thank you.
Thank you.
If Fela hadn't attracted the women, then there would be no Fela, because they were part of the whole edifice in terms of their contributions and all. One of the questions I have asked myself is this: when you look at the way in which we spoke and discuss Fela's music and his evolution, there is indeed an evolution. In fact, people talk about 3 or 4 different stages of his music and all that. So I have asked myself the question: did Fela evolve on the question of women? Do we see any evolution in the question of gender? I don't see it. Yes, even in relationship with Remy, I think in terms of Sandra is very much related to what Kadaria was saying, that in the way in which people treat women, or even treat other people, there are so many other factors. Sandra had that American aura around her. And so we could see that as a result of that, he treated her differently. What I want to say here, another thing that we must pay attention to is that marrying those 27 women was a labor recruiting device. And it was not peculiar to him, because they talk about Hubert Ogunde, like most of them, Hubert Ogunde was. Yes, they talked about Hubert Ogunde. They could never keep female dancers. They could never keep female performers. So the way to keep them and exploit their labor was to marry them. And how is that different from many ordinary marriages? But his relationship with Remy is very important. Because I read my book too, and at the arcade festival, they had a panel in which they brought Femi was on the panel, Maggie was on the panel, and there was a cousin. But I want to say, unfortunately, his sister wasn't there. And I was just shocked at some of their pronouncements. For example, the way in which Femi talked about his mother and the fact that she was lonely, and he himself didn't really have much empathy for her. It was as if, well, it was good that she never went with any man and she didn't disgrace the family. That was a kind of rhetoric that was emanating. The woman stood for 20 years. She didn't have sex with any man. I said she was mimicking what happened to Fela's mother too. So Fela believes that women have family. They can go on and on without sex, but he has to have two women per day. At least. One after the other. So that's the story.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I will be throwing the questions to the audience, and we will
Sorry, can I? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add very quickly to the comments. If you read the book, when Fela was courting the wife, one of the things that's very interesting about the courting was that he still was stepping out. There wasn't. He performed that like he was in love with her. I mean, I sat across from Yeni Kuti when I interviewed her. But also when I read the book, what I took from the book, and this is my theory, was that he was not he liked her. He liked the idea of her. He liked her pedigree and what it would add to the Kuti line. But I don't think he was in love with her enough to want to respect her, because he never respected her as a wife, as a partner, or as the mother of his children. And that disrespect was what we saw with Femi Kuti during that panel, and also to his children, because it wasn't just Femi, it wasn't just mine, it wasn't just a cousin, but it was also the way Getty spoke about her. I remember her saying in that interview that when they invited the children to come for the wedding, that they were all excited to go. And I looked at her and I asked her, in hindsight, how do you feel about that now? She says, after my divorce, I realized I was just a child, and the rhetoric of my father must have harmed the relationship between myself as a mother. As a daughter, as a woman, years after, also being divorced, now having a partner, I realized how my mother went through a lot. So I think the conversation as well should be, I don't think Femi or Fela loved his wife. I do not believe they did. Mrs. Kuti, he was a performer, he liked her pedigree and what he would give his line, and that was that period. He was a quintessential Nigerian man who would court you, chase you, woo you, marry you, and immediately dismiss yourself. That's what he was. Thank you.
Okay, so actually I was an actor as well, and I listened to that conversation, and perhaps my heart was not open to Femi's comments. I didn't get that feedback that you have both said in terms of the way we sort of described her. But he did acknowledge that the best part of himself came from his mother. So I think in many ways he sort of acknowledged her role that she played. But yes, they made a lot of excuses for their father's behavior. But my question is to you, Kandaria. I'm a fan, and my first son's name is Fela, and he's come to see this exhibition. And they, were exposed to quite a few things, and I'm sure they all left thinking, mommy is a feminist, yet she really likes this guy, and there's this photo of this man married to his 7 wives. How do you, because I believe that you are still a fan of Fela and his music, how do you, reconcile that paradox? Because I'm struggling today more than I've ever struggled hearing something.
Yeah, no, it is difficult. And in some ways, you almost have to is what do we call it? Cognitive dissonance. You know, where you listen to the music, and I'm a fan of Fela for two major reasons. His writing is quite unique in the sense that he's able to take everyday things that are going on and put them in a sort of lyrics. But what really uplifts his music, like for those who are jazz fans, they'll understand what I'm talking about, is his arrangements, the way he uses percussion, the way he uses the piano, it's all of that. And it is impossible for you to be a fan of music and not appreciate the artistry and the mastery of what he does, right? So what I do is that I don't listen to the songs that are problematic, right? I kind of do my zombie, all of those other things. And I try not to give airtime to Lady and other things. I mean, I didn't even hear about Mattress until today. I've never heard that song before. Yeah. So but honestly, I think it's important that we understand to a certain extent that I'm not only here to make excuses for my I think because as human beings, we ourselves are full of paradoxes, right? There's a part of us that can sort of understand. I think the difference is that if you are aware, the hope is that you keep trying to become a better person. You keep trying to elevate yourself. And the hope is that the arts, the way we practice them, help with that elevation. Which is why I, as a regular person, if I'm sort of full of paradoxes and I'm doing my internal things and I'm working towards it, it isn't as bad as someone who is a public figure and is influencing hundreds and thousands of people. Which is why it's important the conversations I have, because I think the first step is awareness. And we've got a whole lot of musicians that have been influenced by Fela. And some of his bad behavior, right? Because you can see it in the Burna Boys and those words, the videos and all of that. And so the issue is, must we have arts in a way that corrupts rather than edify? And that is a debate that's going to go on for a very long time because we are people. But our job, I think, is to sort of insist that we keep having these conversations and we keep talking about these things.
So I spoke earlier actually on the preceding panel, and I feel like I personally exist at an intersection that provides a lot of perspective. I'm a singer-songwriter, I'm also a writer, and my first degree and minor in psychology. So when you talk about psychology, it made me chuckle. It means that I have been able to, as soon as I read the book, I was able to connect some dots to his book, This Page of Your Life. In This Page of Your Life, he talked about the abuse from his parents, and that influenced how he chose to raise his kids. I think Rennie mentioned that he only paid Fanny about 3 times or so. He favored talking to the kids over meeting them, and yet, interestingly, he chose to beat the women. But where, like I said, the intersection I exist at, with a minor in psychology, I see connections where people see contradictions. The idea of his mother being a feminist icon, being so antithetical to the stance he took, if you really pay attention to psychology, it tracks. It tracks. His father was no small fry. But for the times, he was a man who society would argue was overshadowed by his wife. When she headed all the movements that she did, I know without a doubt that multiple conversations would have centered around how he was a man who could control his wife. Yes. And Fela grew up watching that. Right. For women we are influenced by the relationship between our parents very differently from how boys are socialized. It's the reason why in feminist discourse today, one of the things you hear us pushing back against online is how women say, I am not going to be my mother. And the boys say, we no longer get women like our mothers. They both watch the same women with the same men. But the boys want more of the same. And the girls say, hell no. So that's the very first thing that we need to establish to remove any confusion. It is a rare boy child who grows up with a feminist mother and becomes feminist for it. Think Trevor Noah. But he's not alone. There's a reason he's not alone. Men will do what they can get away with. Period. Period. The reason why Nigerian marriages today are going abroad and falling apart is because they have systems that penalize them in ways that they don't at home. Now, that's the average man. Take that average man and make him a superstar, and you have what we had in Fela. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Now, to draw a straight line from his relationship with his mother, he was his mother's favorite. But she was such a strong personality. What that means is that in the early years, he probably didn't feel very much like a favorite. Because he said in this picture of life that his mother would beat him so hard, he would sometimes wonder if she was his mother. That's trauma. And in their time, they didn't go to therapy. They didn't fix it.
Just had a hospital and you were good.
Yeah. Now, as somebody who grew up with abuse, who had to have a lot of therapy before I got married and had a kid, I know the process. It doesn't end. I'm 14 years in therapy today. 14 committed years. I'm not the same person that I was 14 years ago. I'm a woman. I'm a woman whose personality predisposes her to empathy, whose conditioning reinforces empathy, which means that before I'm having my child, I'm already thinking, I don't want to replicate what I have. The average man who doesn't have these mitigating factors is looking forward to replicating. You see the online discourse. I see this child, my child, more for victim, more for giver. You are fantasizing about harming a child you haven't even had. So there are layers to this thing. Now, this man did not get there at all. So his resentment for his mother is unacknowledged, untreated, and it has to coexist alongside his admiration and love and respect. A split happens. And the first place you see it show up is in romantic relationships. Because all of a sudden, he has the other hand again. And he's supported by the system. Because there's a reason Mrs. Kuti referred repeatedly to women's leaders in her book in Europe. The fact that it was a movement that had a name meant that the culture hadn't fully changed by then. Even in Europe, much less here in Africa, culture hadn't moved. So this man had his traumas, his proclivities, and the society to enable. Mind you, his mother at this time is past middle age, entering old age. No matter how feminist she was, she could not out-feminist the system. The system did not provide for older women. Women did not have the systems we have today. When men were to us, we ended up with our cats. We said, oh, I look forward to it. We have pensions. We have different means of providing for ourselves in old age, and we now know how to create communities, our friendships. We know how to prioritize all of those things and be women whose old age doesn't frighten us. But at that time, all a woman had in old age was her children. So her power is declining. She's now living with this son who is growing in power. There is no way she could have pushed back with the same behaviors of her. If anything, her seeming enablement of his behavior in her old age is a testament to the fact that there was still feminist work needed despite all of her antecedents. And he was a complex human being, like most of us are. Because there are reports corroborating his kindness, his generosity, repeatedly, and yet, in relation to women, none of it is seen. So, I say this to say, that's to answer the question of his relationship with his mother and his anti-feminist stance, and his relationship with the other women in his later life. Thank you very much.
We'll have one last.
I was scared to come today, but I thought I better put in a few words and kind of get some balance on fella and his feminism or lack thereof. First of all, I'm missing Kuti, by the way. I'm the head of the Kuti family. I'm not defend everybody. Let's just speak truth to power. First of all, I think it was recognized that Funmilayo was not a feminist. She will have a whole conference on that later, but she was thrust into an activism role based on the circumstances of her time. I think probably the motivation was the defense of children. That's how it started. The children were not coming to school, so finding out why they were not coming to school and not going after the causal factors that prevented them and led to the whole women's movement. And I think many people forget the role of Enola Shoika, who was actually the facilitator of the movement. She was all connected with the grassroots women and did all the mobilization and stuff like that. So, like I said, that's another conference probably. But when we look at Funmilayo and we try to juxtapose her role as Fela's mother, we get into trouble. We think she was a feminist, and he was not. She was not a feminist. She was an active woman who defended the rights of anybody that was oppressed, whether it's his children, including women. And, life happens. It then played out in a way that has become kind of legendary. So we can understand Fela better when we understand that she wasn't a feminist in his life. She was his mother, she was a disciplinarian, she was a strong person. And that's, and some of what Fela says is like most people, most popular icons, you throw things out there that may not actually have the same meaning as people will perceive it. For instance, him saying that his parents didn't sleep together. That was normal in those days. Most husbands and wives didn't sleep on the same bed, they had different rooms, even if they were not in a polygamous setting. It was just like you have your own space, all this snooping together and snoring together was not popular. In those days, my parents had different rooms. They had nothing to do with they snuck into each other's beds when we all go to bed. So don't take too much, don't read too much into that.
His father was deprived.
Well, he was wrong. I think father was concerned with feelings whenever he wanted. I'm pretty sure of that. A lot of what happened in there, while Fela was growing up, must also be seen in the context of the times and how parents brought up their children. And don't forget, there were 4 of them. Lupo, Beko, and Lupo. And you see, they all turned out pretty differently. Beko a little bit similar to Fela in some ways. whatever dabbling into his relationships. He kept his own family, his own life very, very separate. You know, so it's like every family, very different. So you can't have a broad brush. But one must realize that Fela was very respectful of strong women. Every strong woman that you can have around Fela, including people like me, who were like sisters, he was very well behaved though. He did not look down on us, disrespect us. You know, I could walk into his palace, so to speak, and sit. I was probably the only person who could sit on that chair. I was his throne. I would just go there and say, anybody trying to leave, I get this, you know. So he naturally respected women, but he did not respect women who did not stand up to him. Women who allowed him to get away with murder. He did not respect them, and he, you know, kind of showed that in the way he treated them. There was no dancing around it. And the artistic side of it also covered a lot of things. This having his children dancing in the cage. So it wasn't just the wives that were in those cages, if you remember. And I remember going to Remias. The first time I saw it, I said, what? Because I had taken a group of my colleagues from Shell. I worked at Shell at the time. Europeans to the shrine, and I saw Yegi inside this cage. You know, so I went to Remy and said, what are your children doing inside the cage? And she said, well, that's what Fela wanted. That's what Fela wants. So I'm trying to illustrate the fact that Fela could have done with a lot more resistance from the women around him. Because in the areas where people like him had influence on him, he certainly, you know, changed some of his behavior, and certainly was never disrespectful to us. And I want to acknowledge what Clara said about this, the license of genius. We give the genius and icons in our societies all over the world, a whole lot of leeway and permission. And they take advantage of it, because they can get away with it. And again, we must be balanced on the way we see someone like Fela treating women. I've seen women treating women just as badly. People who have the opportunity to exploit generally too, whether they're male or female. I've seen women do terrible things to the servants, people in the areas of influence, and the last thing I would say is that I think we're all a little schizophrenic in Africa, because both male and female, because we have a society that permits this patriarchal, dominating kind of understanding of. And and if you study history, one of my favorite books is Sex in History by Ray Tannen, where we came from societies that existed even now, a society like in Tanzania, the Pasa tribe, where equality, those were the early societies, where male and female were equal, everybody was well respected, nobody was the boss, nobody was more important than the other. And then we got influences from religion, from all kinds of other stuff that came from foreign lands, and we're all a little bit confused. So getting over that and finding what the African culture is, that African culture of Ubuntu, of respecting both male and female, not seeing the male as dominant and the female as weak and helpless, and that is also being supported by the females. Let's be honest with ourselves. The mothers, the females in our society pander to, I want a strong man, my husband is the head, when I the tail or whatever you want to do. So we have a lot of work to do to balance our minds and get all of us back to some safe safe place where we respect each other as human beings and do not give too much power to either gender, so that we have a society that is just, peaceful, respectful, and loving. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the contributors. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you to my lovely, wonderful panelists. We're going to wrap up now. It's been so lovely hearing from you. But I would like each person to say one brief, very brief thing about Fela's life. That's all.
Not because of, I just don't have anything to say, to be honest.
No. What is there to say about Fela's life? What we need to say and what we need to talk about is what are we doing now to achieve that society of equality, of justice. Somebody was pointing out that a few weeks ago was Funlayo Ransomuti's birthday. But no, none of us recognized that. We didn't know about it. The degree to which we have a just society, a society in which children can live properly and women can, is very much tied to struggle, to movement. And when it comes to Nigeria, right about now, I'm sure Kakari can speak to it, we need different kinds of movements in which we are fighting for justice. It just won't come. The same thing with the democratic. These things don't come if we don't fight for them. And I think that that's biggest key that, hey, we have to struggle. Fela was into class struggle and struggled. But I said when it came to women, there was no gender struggle as far as he was concerned, because women saw them as objects.
So I have a hope and a prayer, and it is that our female musicians will actually begin to write lyrics and do music that actually addresses some of the issues that women face. I know when we see what they do now, it seems like really far-fetched, right? But imagine if a Thames or a Simi, they're all really extremely talented. And I have to believe if they put their mind to it, to actually write, even if it's in one album, take one song or two songs that address the condition of women, that write the sort of lyrics that Fela wrote regarding the class struggle, like you said, but from the gender lens. And they do it with Afrobeats and with the humor and all of that. They may begin to shift a little bit of the conversation in that space. And yeah, so this is my hope and my prayer that one day we will have young female musicians with the courage to do what people like you are doing in publishing in books, but to actually do it in popular culture. That would be pretty awesome. I think people forget the role of funnels and pipelines in doing things, right? So if you do if you write 10, then you may get 1. But if you write 2, you may end up getting 0. So I think the hours is going to talk about it, encouraging, because I think they have the talent. And I think some of them now have the clout. Not all of them. Well, so that's the job, right? It's to sort of find the ones that share the methodology and encourage them to do it. Yeah, that's it.
And also, I think Fela was an institution, and it continues to be a role model to a lot of people. The only advice is that we all are humans, so it's best in our interest to take the positive side of it and make the best use of the positive side of Fela. The other side, the other aspect of it, I think we should continue to be for which is constant to continue to argue and argue about it. Thank you.
Double Minority, my movie on women in politics, where I followed 9 women during the 2023 election, is doing its television debut tomorrow on channels at
And of those who
Thank you so
said
much.
those, I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Open Society Foundation. I'd like to thank the panel, and most especially I'd like to thank all of you who have spent 2 hours of your, more than 2 hours in some cases of your Saturday with us, trying to think of the more positive aspects of Fela's art. And who came here to listen to Fela females and her music. And for question, Jan answered today. Can you put your phones down, please? I need someone to name 2 tracks on this album. The album is Aphrodisia. If you're asking the title, then you don't know the tracks.
Is it going to be
Then
free?
those 2
Yeah.
tracks on this album. Okay. Questions are always very hard. We are looking for the easy question. In what year was Fulina Ransom Kuti born? Why are you already about scrambling, I think I'll give the record to you. What's your name? Taking away the youth and the women. So, does anyone know where next week we have Billy on the police advice doing a master class on the lyrics of Kumate.
I think MotherlandRTV. I don't know, I think MotherlandRTV.
Lenny Karioku talking about Fela and himself, as well as one of the 27 wives that so we look forward to seeing you again next week, and thank you very much. Thank you, Open Society foundations. Thank you, the panel, most especially, thank you all of you. Have a good weekend. And I would like to thank Auntie Jenny